Hello, I'm Jez Smith and welcome to idea number 10 from the book Humans Are Not Resources, 50 Great Ideas for Managing a Modern Lean Agile Workforce. Now this idea is called First Impressions Count when hiring Lean Agile talent, and it's looking at this idea of what is it like to hire great Lean Agile talent, because I think many organisations have a real problem in this area. And the problem comes from the fact that there are lots and lots and lots of people out there now claiming to be Lean Agile talent. You've only got to put the words Enterprise Agile Coach into LinkedIn and you'll find thousands, tens of thousands possibly, of results. Suddenly, Agile is big news. So everyone who is a project manager is now calling themselves an Agile coach. Anyone who is a program manager is calling themselves an Enterprise Agile coach. But the fundamental truth of the matter really is that to be an Agile coach or to be an Enterprise Agile coach, all you have to have is the ability to change your tagline on LinkedIn. There are certifications out there for Agile coaching, but do they really demonstrate years and years of experience? Generally not. A few of them do, but generally they don't. And you don't even need a certification to call yourself an Agile coach. So suddenly everyone's an Agile coach, just in the way a few years ago everyone was a Scrum Master, and then they realised that Agile coaches got paid more than Scrum Masters, so suddenly everyone rebrands themselves, which creates a real problem when you're trying to hire people to help with Lean and Agile and transformation within your organisation. Because how do you know who's good out there? In my experience, there are actually very few, comparatively, really good people at this, and when you find them, they're generally really busy because they spread via word of mouth. They work in an organisation and they get hung on to by the organisation very often. It's really hard to find and attract genuine Lean Agile talent. Now that's a problem in the marketplace. That's something that exists kind of external to whatever organisation you're working in at the moment. But there are things I think organisations do internally that make this problem far harder for them than it needs to be. And that's why I say first impressions count when you're hiring Lean Agile talent, because actually your hiring process in a kind of seller's market, as it were, in a place where there are very few talented, genuinely talented people out there and lots of organisations looking to hire them. Your hiring process is as much about them interviewing you as it is about you interviewing them. And they have many offers out there. They can walk away at any point. So you need to look at your hiring process and say, is this turning people on or is this turning people off the organisation? Now, there's many things you can look at in this area. What I'd like to do in this video is just share a few of them that I've noticed over time. So the very first impression people often get is little things in the job ad that just read wrong. A really common one for this is people write the word Scrum in capital letters. Scrum is not an acronym. Scrum comes from the game of rugby. You have a scrum in rugby. That was kind of what inspired the term in that particular Scrum framework. But because in the world of traditional project management, very often things are acronyms. PRINCE2, for example, that project management approach called PRINCE2 stands for Projects in Controlled Environments 2, which is why it's Prince. So people look at Scrum and go, that must be an acronym as well. So we'll write Scrum in all caps. And a few years ago, I did some research on this. I did some interviews with some Agile people. And some of them actually said, if I ever see Scrum written in all capital letters, I walk away at that point. I'm like, the organisation can't understand what Scrum is because it thinks it's an acronym. It hasn't really thought this through and so forth. Say people do apply to your job ad. People kind of, start to get into the process. Sometimes organisations still have their legacy systems where the first stage is an automated set of questions and people have to kind of answer questions in a certain order and they get a score, and if they get over a certain threshold they go through to the next round. But if you look at what the Agile Manifesto says, the Agile Manifesto says we value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And if the very first thing you're giving an Agile person is a process and a tool, again, it starts to say, does your organisation really get this? Do you understand what this is? Or are you still stuck in your kind of process and tools kind of way? Another manifestation of that is CV scoring software. Not everyone seems to know about this, but very often CVs can be run through automated programs that do keyword density scoring and so forth, and give that person a score on sort of how good their CV is, how good their experience is. But all you need to do to get through that is just buy a service which knows what keyword densities are and applies that to your CV, and there you go. It's another slightly pointless process and tool that doesn't really provide a useful check and balance, but again shouts to Lean Agile people this organisation doesn't really get it, or this organisation hasn't really thought this through, and so forth. Often that's then carried through to the interview process too. You know, that classic interview, give me an example of a time when you have, and the interviewer has a series of sort of numbers they have to circle depending on the answer you give and the score you get, and then your scores are added up and so forth. We need to be fair and balanced and objective in our interviews, of course we do. But really, if you're running such a strict process that you're not actually having a conversation with the person and saying, you know, let's make this a two-way discussion between us, rather than just, you know, I'll read out a question, you give the answer, I score it, I read out the next question, give me the answer, score it, and so on and so on. Again, you're starting to show people this organisation hasn't really moved towards lean and agile ways. And then if you do decide to hire them, if you get through to the end, nothing says I don't trust you like a reference checking process. And yes, one of the principles in the Agile Manifesto says we should trust people to get the job done. And so if you're running a reference checking process, immediately there's a sense there that kind of, you know, you seem great, but we don't trust you. We're still going to check that all the things you said are true, and so forth. And in a way, that's kind of fine. You can't trust everyone implicitly all the time. Someone walks in off the street, says they used to be the CEO of Apple. You probably want to check that out, because they probably weren't the CEO of Apple, statistically speaking. You'll need to check that sort of stuff. But at the very least, you could turn that reference process into something valuable for both sides. You could have a sort of more empathetic approach to it, to say to the person, this is the feedback we got from your organisation. What do you think about it? Is this useful feedback that you haven't seen before? Can you do something with this? How can we turn this into a plan for what you could do more of or less of when you join our organisation? How do you keep that constructive two-way conversation going? Just as your hiring process and your interviewing process should be much more about a constructive two-way conversation, your reference process could start to become that as well. So lots and lots of areas where this can go wrong. Those are just pulling out some of them. But in a market where finding great talent is really difficult, I think organisations have a real imperative to start to look at this. And the experiment I would like you to try is to try to map out that end-to-end process for hiring from the customer's point of view, from the hiree's point of view. What do people experience when your organisation tries to hire them? Often people map out the process internally and look for where there are delays because they need to get more people on board more quickly, so they look to speed up the process. But is that taking a customer-centric view, which is what a lean agile approach would say? Almost certainly not. So map this out from a customer perspective, see what it really feels like, and then look to make optimizations to it. That classic lean agile thing, you know, inspect and adapt. Look where you are, inspect what your current process is like, and then look to adapt and improve it based on feedback, based on research, based on learnings, based on things you look at and go, good grief, didn't realize we were doing that wrong. We need to fix that. Start looking at that, the perspective of the hiree, map that entire journey and optimize it as you go along. Because you have to in a market where genuine talent is so rare that it's hugely, hugely competitive, and they're very, very easy to turn off in my experience. So I hope you found that of interest. If you do, feel free to leave a like on this video. That would be lovely. If you've got any thoughts or comments on this, I'd love to hear them. Do feel free to leave a comment down below. And if you really liked it, feel free to subscribe to this channel. There are plenty more videos like this coming up.